Now, here's what you don't know. Charles Osborne rows this ferry for 37 years, pulls off these stunts. He's blind. He can't see. He has cataracts from the time that he's 14 years old. His father was a great whaling master, and Charlie was destined to follow him. But his eyes begin to cloud over. They take him up to a doctor in Boston.
Right.
There's nothing that they can do. And so he's done as far as being
How
missing.
could he find his way from
great
port
question.
to port?
I can only imagine it. And here's what I think happened. I think he had enough sort of smeary sense of light and dark.
Right, right.
I think by smell, by light, by the feel of his, he was so familiar with Edgartown Harbor. I'm going to venture to say that he probably knew that harbor better than any man alive. When there were shipwrecks to go to in the outer harbor or bodies to look for, they chose him to lead the search parties because he could tell. He could say, if it happened then, the wind was doing this, the tide has been doing this, this is where we're probably going to find what it is that we're looking for. Now, bear in mind also that the traffic in Edgartown from 1883 when he starts to 1920 when he quits is much more industrial than it is recreation. We don't have, you know, Rhodes 19s and Herreshoff 12s and Fs tacking in and out of there. You got big vessels that are tacking in and out. He can hear them coming. Other rowboats, other commercial boats, well, you're just going to avoid a rowboat. You're going to know Charlie Osborne. You're going to steer around him. And he's basically got one job, which is to go back and forth from here to there, basically Edgartown Marine to Chappie Point. And I have to believe that he had just enough of a sense of smell.
Or enough sight, you know, because sometimes people like that, like they can look at the side and they can't see straight ahead, but they can look at the side and just see shadows or whatever it is.
He was a great rigger also of whaling ships. We have one description of him in his old age by a young man who wrote about him for an essay at Harvard University. And unfortunately, the young man died almost, he was killed in a car accident right after he wrote this piece. It was the last thing the kid ever did. And he described Charlie Osborne. He said he was the most upright man I ever knew. He was also, he rented sailboats and things like that. And this kid would go down to hang out at Charlie Osborne's boathouse. And it's the only description we have of Charlie getting around in old age and literally walking down the pier with his arms out and feeling his way from piling to piling. And his nieces, who knew him quite near the end of his life, said that he could do things like feel his way around a cribbage board and that he could hold a playing card right up to his eye and make out the suite and the rank of it. So maybe in those days, there's actually a picture in here, and I love this moment. Found a picture of him at the Martha's Vineyard Museum, and he's in a band, the Edgartown Cornet Band, and he plays the bass drum. And it's a portrait. They're standing at the front of the town hall, and all of the men are looking forward with their instruments, and he's standing sort of a quarter turn away. And he's got the drum there, and another woman whom I'd never met was looking at the picture with me, and she said, "Is he blind?" She could tell from a picture of 130, 40 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, there was something sort of vacant in his face.
How did the movie Jaws and Kennedy hitting the bridge affect the Chappie Ferry and whatnot?
Okay. I won't go through all the events of what happened at Chappaquiddick. In part, the book concentrates very much on the ferry's role in it. But you got to bear in mind this. You know, we're surrounded by little islands, Matticat, Tuckernuck, outside of New England, maybe outside of Massachusetts, anonymous. And that's what Chappaquiddick was before the night of July 18, 1969. Anonymous.
That's right.
After that, that weekend, it's probably one of the most famous places on Earth. And the ferry and the island were overwhelmed. Jerry Grant was the owner at the time.
Jerry Grant, I know Jerry very well.
And he, I think, saved the place because the pressure on him to run year-round with this little ferry like I was describing to you on time, the pressure on him was overwhelming. The world press, the whole world wants to go there.
They wanted to go, and they wanted to see this bridge. And I found out years later that they had to reconstruct that bridge twice.
They did.
Because people were taking pieces of it.
They did.
And therefore the bridge became unsafe, and therefore they had to reconstruct it again, and then people would go back and take, and they'd have to do it again until, I guess, the novelty was done, and then they didn't have to do it again. But Chappaquiddick, you're right, it became, and when people on the other side, Chappaquiddick.
Yeah.
The first thing not Vineyard Haven or Martha's Vineyard, Chappaquiddick.
Yeah, it's like Watergate. It becomes a word that stands for something else. And just astonishing.
Tom, we got 2 minutes.
Okay.
Tom, tell me something about this book that would entice people to read it that we haven't talked about.
Sure. In the back of it, there's a movie. There's a 15-minute long film on DVD that was produced and directed by a friend of mine named John Wilson, who's imprinted on the ferry just like I was. Grew up here as he was a summer dad. And he has done the most wonderful job of bringing this ferry to life today.
The story of the Chappaquiddick Ferry, I think, is the story of the whole island writ small. Every single thing you run across island history, and it's got one of the longest, most uninterrupted histories written down of any place outside of a city. You see that story crop up on the island of Chappaquiddick or to do with the ferry itself. How do you separate fiction from fact? In some respects, at this point, you probably don't.
Chappaquiddick is special. My family years ago fell in love with the beauty and the peacefulness of this island that defines the entrance to Edgartown Harbor. During my years running NBC Sports, this is where I came after countless Summer Olympics, Wimbledon's US Open golf tournaments to relax and to recover and to regroup.
The thing is, it's so unique. This thing from 1807 upward and onward was designed and built to serve the needs of the moment. It has answered those needs almost perfectly, all the way through history, sometimes a little late, and sometimes affecting the life on the island it serves pretty substantially.
I have been saying up until fairly recently that this was a movie that, this is a book that came with a movie. I now think it may be a movie that comes with a book.
It might be.
And the fact that, that we live, the most fortunate thing for me is that we live on Martha's Vineyard and that there is a publishing company here.
Right.
An independent publishing company here with all the problems that publishing is having today.
Right.
This is their 25th book about Martha's Vineyard, going back just 6 or 7 years, Vineyard Stories.
Listen, this has been great. Time flew by. I was so interested in this because, being here for 50 years and knowing very little about the ferry, and I went across that ferry probably 100 times. Tom, we're going to be doing a few other things in the course of the next few months, a few other book stories. I thank you for coming on Tank Talk. And
my first interview to do with this book. Thank you so much.
Great. And I definitely welcome you back. You have an open invitation. I know we're going to be coming back. So I want to thank you. And I want to thank you for tuning in to Tank Talk. Until next time, this is your host, Bob Tankard, saying good evening.